Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you all back to the Boombox Guru channel. I'm your host, LB. So today I got a new Digging Through the Stacks episode. I think this might be episode 4. I'm not quite sure, but whatever the correct number is, I'll have it in the title after I finish recording this video. So today's Digging Through the Stacks episode, I wanted to talk about a particular box set that I believe I actually mentioned in the first Digging Through the Stacks episode I did. I wanted to talk about this box set called Deep Purple, the complete albums 1970 to 1976. So this is a little box set that includes 10 albums from the English hard rock band Deep Purple. And anybody that knows Deep Purple, anybody that's a fan of hard rock music, heavy metal, Deep Purple is one of the greatest hard rock bands of all time. They're a band that's been around for over 50 years now. And they're still active. They're still putting out new music. They're still touring. I don't know exactly what lineup they're on now. I think they're on the Mark. I think it might be Mark 6 lineup. I think that's the lineup, man. But this particular box set, it mainly focuses on the Mark 2 to Mark 4 era of the band. It focuses on those lineups. So the band's first 3 albums done with the Mark 1 lineup. They're not included in this box set. Although you can get those first 3 albums. I think I seen them on Amazon, like remastered copies of them. And 2 of those albums are available on streaming. But yeah, it mainly focused with the Mark II, the Mark IV lineup, particularly the Mark II and Mark III lineup. Honestly, because that Mark IV lineup only did 1 record before the band broke up the first time. And I think the Mark II lineup, that's honestly the most popular lineup of the band, with Mark III being a close second, in my personal opinion. But yeah, I just been listening to a lot of like hard rock, heavy metal, particularly from the 70s and the 80s here lately. And this particular box set is one that's been on regular rotation for me. And I just wanted to talk about it, man. And I don't, Deep Purple is a great rock band. You can't talk enough about Deep Purple. So yeah, I thought that I would just break down my opinions and some of the info that I know about these albums in this particular box set, man. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video as I discuss Deep Purple, the complete albums 1970 to 1976. All right, so these first 3 albums that I'm going to show, these are actually live albums that are part of this set. These are live albums that were recorded by the Mark II and the Mark III lineups. And as you can see, these little box sets, they come in these little cardboard sleeves or whatever, kind of like little miniature vinyl sleeves or whatever. So let's talk the first one. This is Deep Purple, the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Malcolm Arnold. I think this came out, 1969? No, 1970. It was 1970. This came out in 1970. This is a live album with Deep Purple performing with a classic orchestra. And this was actually the first album released with the Mark II lineup. So this was the first album with Ian Gillan on vocals and Roger Glover on bass. Yeah, it's kind of odd that this album actually came out before the first studio album with the Mark II lineup. And I remember watching an interview that Ian Gillan he did on Loudwire. He did a Wikipedia Fact or Fiction episode where he talked about how the band was not really in agreement with their management about putting this album out before the first album with the Mark II lineup, Deep Purple and Rock. But for whatever reason, the management thought it would be better to just put this album out first. And Ian Gillan, he initially didn't, I don't think he was too fond of this album initially, but I think years later when Deep Purple performed with the London Symphony, it clicked with him and he went back and he has more of an appreciation for what they did with this record. He just feels that it just came out at the wrong time, that it should have came out after Deep Purple and Rock. But me personally, I haven't listened to this album, so I'm not much of a live album type of person. There are a few live albums that I will listen to and dig, but I haven't really listened to this one that much, so I can't really give much of my opinion on it musically and whatever. But I think it's interesting anytime rock bands or metal bands perform with symphonies and so forth. I think that's a pretty interesting thing. You know, Megadeth done it, I think, not too long ago, and of course we all know Metallica, the S&M albums that they've done uh, throughout the years. That I know that first S&M album was well received, so I might give this a spin sometime later. Just to listen to it. But that's about all I can really say about this album. All right, this next one, this is Made in Japan, released in 1972. Again with the Mark II lineup. This live album, it covers songs from that. Well, not cover like a cover song, but basically it features songs from the band's Fireball album and Machine Head album, which I'm pretty sure was relatively new at that time, 1972. Now, I have listened to this album, Made in Japan, and actually this is the only live Deep Purple album that I have on my iPod. And the reason being is because I've heard so many Deep Purple fans talk about how this is one of the greatest live albums to ever be released. And they're correct. I listened to it, and I got to tell you, man, the music on here is awesome. And this is coming from somebody that doesn't really care that much about live albums, but the music on here is so awesome, especially Highway Star. Highway Star on this live version on this album is so much heavier than the studio version. And look, don't get me wrong, I like the studio version of that record, but yeah, this live version is just so much intense, man. The overall playing on here, like Ian Pace's drumming, John Lord's his work on the keyboards, Ian Gillan's performance, the bass, Richie Blackmore, his guitar especially, his guitar is just so heavier on this version. I mean, it really turns the song into a heavy metal track. It really does. Space Trucking sounds awesome. Every song on here is just played at a more intense pace, in a more intense style, so to speak, man. So, yeah, I really like this, man, and I will agree that this is definitely one of the greatest live albums to ever be recorded, man. So I really enjoyed this one. Really had a lot of had a lot of fun listening to this one. And the last one, this is Deep Purple, Made in Europe. So this was recorded with the Mark III lineup. So David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes are in the band, and it's also I think it features the final shows that Richie Blackmore did with the band before he left. He left and started Rainbow, and then of course he got back in the band back in '84 when they did the Perfect Strangers album. This record, I haven't listened to it yet. I know that when this album came out, it came out after the band broke up in 1976. So they were trying to, I guess, repeat the same success that they had with Made in Japan. But as far as I know, the album didn't have nowhere near the same success as Made in Japan. And I think that people have reassessed this album in retrospect, and they consider it to be a pretty good live album as well. Again, I haven't listened to it myself to really know, but I've heard some people in videos about Deep Purple mention that Made in Europe was also a pretty good live album. But they've all said that Made in Japan is the best one. People say that this is one of the greatest live albums ever recorded, and I have to agree. So yeah, that's I just wanted to get those three albums out of the way because, like I said, I'm not really big on live albums, but that Made in Japan album is really good. So if you never heard Made in Japan, even if you're not a live album person, definitely check that one out. I think you'll really enjoy that one. Okay, so the next album I want to talk about, and this is actually the first studio album in this box set, and it's actually the fourth studio album from Deep Purple, but it will be the first studio album with the Mark II lineup, and that is Deep Purple and Rock, released in 1970, right here, Deep Purple and Rock. What an awesome album cover. Here's the back cover. So these little sleeves, they actually kind of replicate, I guess, the original vinyls that came out back in the day too. Yeah, Deep Purple and Rock, released in 1970, man. Let me tell you something. This is one of the greatest rock albums to ever be recorded, hands down. This is one of the greatest hard rock albums to ever be recorded. This was actually it was a change in sound for Deep Purple, because if you listen to those first three Deep Purple albums, the band had more of a psychedelic rock, prog rock style. And a lot of those early records with the Mark One lineup, they had original songs, but they also had quite a bit of cover songs on those albums too. Uh, I don't know. I think that was kind of a thing back in the '60s for bands to have like a lot of cover songs mixed in with like originals as well. But Deep Purple and Rock, this is where the band established that signature Deep Purple sound, that hard rock, heavy metal sound. A very heavy album, especially for 1970. And along with Black Sabbath's first album, as well as Led Zeppelin, this is considered to be an album that really helped to develop hard rock and heavy metal. So a lot of bands were influenced by this, and I gotta tell you, so many great songs on this record. I really like the production on here as well. The production is so rough and gritty. It really sounds like the band recorded this in a garage somewhere, and that's what I really enjoy about it. I mean, man, the drumming, Richie Blackmore's riffs, I mean, Ian Gillan, his vocal performance, the way he hits those high notes and those screams, John Lord on the keys, Roger Glover's bass, I mean, everything. I just really like that gritty sound of the production, man. It sounds very like heavy garage rock in some aspects, man. But so many great songs on this album. I think there's 7 tracks on here. Let's see, Speed King, great album opener. Bloodsucker, that's a heavy metal track right there. That is a heavy metal. It's like kind of a slow, like heavy metal track. Very heavy riffs on there. Child in Time is wonderful. Flight of the Rat is another great one. Into the Fire, Living Wreck, Hard Loving Man. Every song on this album is just a knockout. So I consider Deep Purple and Rock to be my favorite of the Mark II lineup. Really like this album. It's just such a rocking album. One of the best records that Deep Purple ever put out, man. So definitely check out Deep Purple and Rock. If you never heard their music, definitely a great gateway into getting into band's music. But you definitely can hear how this album was very influential to heavy metal music, man. So Deep Purple and Rock, if you haven't heard this album, you're truly missing out on a classic hard rock album. One of the greatest hard rock albums to ever be released. Alright, so this next album, this is Deep Purple's 5th studio album. This is Fireball, released in 1971. This is the band's 5th studio album. Excuse me. But it's the second with the Mark II lineup. Now this is one of Deep Purple's most popular albums, because I remember years ago I used to see this one and Machine Head at Walmart a lot. Back in the day when Walmart used to have the budget bin full of CDs, this one and Machine Head used to be in there a lot. And you know what? I really kind of miss those budget bins of music that Walmart used to have, man, because I used to find a lot of great stuff. I used to find some gems in there. I wish Walmart wouldn't have got rid of that. But in any regards, man, Fireball, this album, it's a good record. It's a strong follow up to Deep Purple and Rock. I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would definitely say that Deep Purple and Rock is the better record, but this one, it's got some real hard rocking tunes. It wasn't as commercially successful as Deep Purple and Rock, but it still had a huge impact on a lot of people when it was released. Like I said, this one and Machine Head I used to see all the time, like at big chain stores in the music section. And a lot of heavy metal musicians, a lot of them have cited Fireball as a very influential album. Lars Ulrich of Metallica has cited this album as an influence. King Diamond, Yngwie Malmsteen, so many other people. Michael Monroe from Hanoi Rocks, he cited this as a influence that got him into rock and roll music, or wanted to begin a career in rock and roll. So even though it might not have been as good or had the same level of success as Deep Purple and Rock, it still had an impact. Some of my favorites on here are, of course, the title track, Fireball, No No No, which is one of my favorite Deep Purple songs, Strange Kind of Woman, let's see here, No One Came, The Mule, Fool's Game, Anyone's Daughter. I mean, Anyone's Daughter is not necessarily that might be my least favorite on the album, but it's a good song. It's more of like a country rock type of song. In my opinion, that's the way it sounds. But it's good. I mean, it's not a terrible song. I listen to it. But this record, the band had a lot of trouble when it came to recording this album. From what I was reading, their management had them on a very rigorous tour schedule, and Deep Purple started to get really burnt out. Some of the members were starting to have health problems while out on the road because they had been out on the road too much. I think a lot of the songs were actually kind of written while they were on tour, and I want to say that maybe they kind of how they recorded the album was like during like times off during this tour schedule. That's how they would like kind of get together, rehearse, and maybe lay down tracks and so forth. But the band was really burnt out by the time they recorded this album. I know Richie Blackmore, he's quoted as saying is, you know, he doesn't really like this album too much because he feels that because a lot of the song ideas were like spur of the moment things that he just threw out there so the band could have material. But yeah, they were having a hard time coming up with a lot of material for this record. Also, the UK version of the album, because the band's American record label was Warner Brothers. It has a slightly different track list. The UK version, the original UK version, has a song called Demon Eyes in place of Strange Kind of Woman, which Strange Kind of Woman was on the American version. But something about Demon Eyes, when they recorded that song, Warner Brothers was kind of pressuring them to get an album out because they had tour dates or something. So they didn't have enough time to add, I think, Demon Eyes on there or something like that. And so they just had that version on the UK one. They just had Demon Eyes on the UK version, something to that effect. But I think on later reissues and so forth, Demon Eyes has been added like as a bonus track or something to that extent. But I think this album was also like the first crack in Deep Purple's Mark II lineup, I believe, because the tension started to rise in the band, particularly between Ian Gillan and Richie Blackmore. I think this is where like their relationship, their friendship or whatever started to deteriorate. So, you know, that would lead to other later issues later on, which we'll get to later in this video. But still, in spite of all the obstacles that the band had putting this album together, I still think that they really put out a great record that was a strong follow-up to Deep Purple and Rock. And like I said, this record, I've heard more people talk about how this record influenced them to start a career in hard rock and heavy metal. So yeah, Fireball, another great record. Also like the album cover. I really did that album cover. That's one of my favorites. Like when I used to see this album at Walmart, before I even listened to Deep Purple, I would just pick up this CD and just look at the album cover because I just liked it so much. But yeah, still a great record. Still got a lot of great tunes in spite of whatever obstacles they faced going into recording this album. Alright, so the next album is 1972's Machine Head. And like I said about Fireball, this is another Deep Purple album that I used to see a whole lot at Walmart in that budget bin of CDs. Was Machine Head. And Machine Head is actually Deep Purple's most commercially successful album. It is. You know, it had their biggest hit, Smoke on the Water, which is a classic rock standard. I know so many people probably heard that song somewhere, whether it be in movies, commercials. It's a staple of classic rock radio. But it also had included some other favorites of mine, Highway Star and Space Truck. And those are two of my favorite Deep Purple songs added on to like the other ones I mentioned. Those are some more of my favorite all-time Deep Purple songs. Highway Star, which another influential song that helped to influence a lot of people into hard rock and heavy metal. Space Trucking as well. Like Highway Star and Space Trucking, I think those are probably like the two most covered Deep Purple songs because I've heard so many metal bands cover those songs. My favorite cover of Highway Star is the one done by Metal Church. They did a cover on their first album, Highway Star. Their first album was actually it's self-titled. It's called Metal Church. But the last song on that album is a cover of Deep Purple's Highway Star. And man, that was such a great cover. That's one of my favorites on that album. And then Space Trucking, this Christian metal band called Vengeance Rising, on their second album called Once Dead, they actually did a really like thrashed out cover version of Space Trucking that is so awesome and so unique. Like definitely go check out those cover songs, man, because they're phenomenal. But this is a really good record. I think sometimes people kind of tend to dismiss Machine Head a little bit because of Smoke on the Water. Smoke on the Water has been, like I said, it's such an overplayed song. Like if you don't know any song by Deep Purple, you know Smoke on the Water. But it's a good song. Smoke on the Water is a good song, and it's based on a true story. If you look it up, you'll know the story that went behind the creation of that song. It's very interesting. It involves the Frank Zappa's band and at the Montreux Jazz Festival or Casino, something like that, where a fire broke out. Some idiot shot a flare gun during Frank Zappa's performance and started a fire in the venue, and they had to clear everybody out. But yeah, very interesting story that goes along with that song. That's what inspired it. But so many great songs on here, man. Like Maybe I'm a Leo, Pictures of Home, Never Before, Lazy. A lot of great songs on this record, man. So yeah, people kind of dismiss it a little bit because of Smoke on the Water, but listen, Smoke on the Water is a great song. Highway Star is great. Space Trucking and everything else on here is great. So definitely a great heavy metal record right here. Hard rock heavy metal album. Another one that really helped to develop heavy metal further in the 1970s. And I would say that Machine Head is my second favorite from the Mark II lineup. Really dig this album. So check it out. Probably the most easiest and most accessible Deep Purple album that you can find. So if you ever want to dig into the band, definitely check out this album right here. Machine Head, classic hard rock right here. Okay, so the next album we're going to talk about is Who Do We Think We Are, released in 1973. 1973, man. I think I think I would consider this one maybe my third favorite Deep Purple album. Well, I don't know. I really like Fireball a lot too. So I don't know, but I'll put it to you like this. I really like this album. Who Do We Think We Are? This was actually the final album with the Mark II lineup, as Ian Gillan and Roger Glover. They would both leave the band after its release, and they wouldn't return until 1984 with the Perfect Strangers album. But this album is a bit underrated. A lot of people don't really talk about it as much, and when it initially came out, it really received a lot of mixed reviews from critics and so forth. But it's really a good record. I mean, it's got some great songs on here. Woman from Tokyo, Super Trooper, Rat Bat Blue, which is another one of my all-time favorite Deep Purple songs. Rat Bat Blue. Ah, man, that rhythm and everything about that song is just so rocking. I really did that song. Ian Gillan's performance on there, it's one of my favorites from Ian, to hear Ian Gillan sing on. I mean, you just gotta listen to that song, Rat Bat Blue. It is so awesome. But I really like this album. They went for a more blues-based sound on this record than they did on the prior ones. But it's still very hard rocking. I think in retrospect, a lot of people have reassessed this album and they look at it as a very strong record within the Mark II lineup. I think a lot of people have reassessed this album and it's been reviewed more positively, man. But yeah, it's a really dope record. I just think that the Mark II lineup kind of breaking up was kind of what kind of overshadowed this record, because right after the record came out, Roger Glover and Ian Gillan both ended up leaving the band. But aside from that, man, still a great record, still a strong follow-up in the Mark II lineup. So definitely check this one out as well. Who Do We Think We Are, 1973. All right, next album. This is the first album with the Mark III lineup, and that is 1974's Burn. 1974's Burn right here. Man, this is one of my favorite album covers of all time. Just really dig it, man. You see, they had these candles that are replicas of the band members of the time and stuff like that. I really need to get this on a t-shirt. I've seen t-shirts of this album. I really need to get that, man. Let's see, here's the back cover. You see, got the members of the band back there and the more melted candles and stuff like that. But man, Burn is one of my favorite Deep Purple albums of all time. It might be my favorite Deep Purple album of all time. Honestly, the Mark III lineup. So this is the first album to feature David Coverdale, who will go on to greater success with Whitesnake, and Glenn Hughes. Glenn Hughes, man. Glenn Hughes, when I really dug into Deep Purple, Glenn Hughes became one of my favorite singers, man, because his whole vocal style and his bass playing, oh man, it's just remarkable. But yeah, David Coverdale was actually he was very unknown when he joined Deep Purple. Nobody really knew who he was. Glenn Hughes, he was known because he was in a band called Trapeze. He was known for that. But yeah, this is a phenomenal record. I know a lot of people were upset about the departure of Ian Gillan and Roger Glover and that the whole ending of that Mark II lineup. But man, it's hard to really overlook the Mark III era with this album, because this album just is just so good. I mean, I think when it initially came out, people kind of overlooked it a little bit because it was a different lineup, because Ian Gillan wasn't there no more, neither was Roger Glover. But I think people really kind of got into the album. I think over time people really kind of appreciated this record for how great it is, because it's a great record. It's really good. I mean, the opening song, the title track, "Burn," that's one of Deep Purple's greatest songs. I mean, some people, I mean, I would put that up there right. I would put that song right up there with Highway Star, as far as opening tracks. I would put it right up there with Highway Star, Fireball, Speed King, well, some of the other ones, man. Such a great opening song to this album. And then you got songs like "Might Just Take Your Life," "Lay Down, Stay Down," "Sail Away," the boogie rock of "You Fool No One," "Mistreated," the bluesy "Mistreated." Oh man, so many great songs. And see, Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale, you know, David Coverdale came from a blues background, and Glenn Hughes, his roots were in R&B, funk, and soul. So you start to hear traces of those influences coming into the band's sound with this record. Now it still got that signature hard rock, heavy metal sound of the prior records, but you're starting to hear some differences. Like a lot of that blues and a lot of that soul matched up with the hard rock and metal. It just sounds so great on this record, man. But yeah, if you ask me what my favorite Deep Purple album of all time was, I'm going to tell you "Burn." This is just such a great record. I listen to this album so much. I mean, it's just a phenomenal album, man. I can't get enough of it, man. I'm actually planning on getting like an individual CD copy of this, because there's like a 2005, I think, expanded edition that comes with some bonus tracks. I think songs that were recorded during this era that didn't make the album. I think some remixes and so forth. So just because of the favoritism that I hold towards this album, I think it deserves for me to have an individual copy in its in my collection, man. I plan on doing that. But man, one of the greatest records of all time, one of the greatest hard rock albums of all time, one of my favorite album covers as well. But yeah, Deep Purple, "Burn," telling you, man, one of the best hard rock albums of all time. If you've never heard this album, you need to go check it out now. It's on Spotify, so go listen to it. Just such a phenomenal rock record. Tell you won't be disappointed if you listen to this. All right, so the next album we're going to talk about, and this one also came out in 1974. So the band put out 2 albums in 1 year. This is Stormbringer. So this is the second album with the Mark III lineup. Like I said, released in 1974. And this will be the last album with the Mark III lineup, because Richie Blackmore, he would end up leaving the band after its release. Well, after they did a few shows on tour for this album, he would then leave. I think it was due to creative differences, because he was wanting to go in a different direction musically, and the other members are kind of, I don't know. I think he wanted to go in a direction that would eventually end up being his band Rainbow that he formed after he left Deep Purple. But this is my second favorite from the from the Mark III lineup. Stormbringer is my second favorite. Like, this album is really different than the prior record, and definitely different from the Mark II lineup. This record, the band leaned a lot into funk and soul. So Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale's influences really were more prominent on this record. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still got some hard rock elements to it, but you can definitely hear a more emphasis on soul, blues, and funk. So there's some R&B flavors sprinkled on here. Like I said, Glenn Hughes, even though one of his nicknames is the voice of rock, his roots are in R&B, soul, and funk. Those are his roots. I mean, his first solo album was a funk and soul album, but so a lot of those influences are more prominent on here, man. You can hear it from the first track on the album, which is the title song, Stormbringer. That's like one of the greatest funk rock songs I've ever heard. And then you got the soulfulness of a Holy Man. Hold On is very soulful. So a lot of those elements are all over this album, but I like it. I still like it. You know, yeah, they did kind of tone down on the hard rock and heavy metal element of the prior records, but I think they did an amazing job by bringing in those funk and soul elements. I just think they did. And, you know, somebody who grew up listening to funk and soul, you know, that's in my wheelhouse as well. But in regards, I think a lot of Deep Purple fans still like Stormbringer as well. So it was definitely a strong follow up to Burn. You know, I've heard a lot of people talk about how great Stormbringer is too, and I think this album is a little bit underrated as well because, you know, like I said, they kind of put more emphasis on that funk and soul influence, man. But it's still a great record. A lot of great songs on here, so don't overlook it just because they might have toned down a bit on the rock. The rock is still there, man, but you know, you're definitely gonna get a lot of funk. You're definitely gonna get a lot of soul and some R&B flavor sprinkled on here as well. But I dig it. That's why I dig it so much. I think that was a good uh, combination to have all those elements on here. They did a wonderful job in putting those elements together. So Stormbringer, released in 1974, man, awesome album, strong follow up to Burn. So don't overlook this one either. All right, so the last album on this video that we're gonna talk about. This is the studio album in the box set. So we're gonna talk about "Come Taste the Band," released in 1975, and this was the only album with the Mark IV lineup. The only album with the Mark IV lineup. So it's the only album with guitarist Tommy Bolin. He joined the band after Richie Blackmore's exit, uh, and yeah, it was the only album he did with the band. Unfortunately, he passed away not long after the band broke up. The band ended up breaking up in 1976 because, you know, the Mark III lineup just wasn't working out anymore. It was just a lot of things going on. You can definitely go and read about a lot of the things that were happening during the time. I won't get too much into it on here, man, but a lot of drugs and, you know, that sex, drugs, rock and roll thing. A lot of that was happening. It was starting to take a toll on the band. But "Come Taste the Band," I really like this record. I really enjoy it. Again, I think this is another underrated album. A lot of people didn't like this album when it came out. A lot of people felt that it wasn't a true Deep Purple album. Even some of the members have kind of questioned, you know, whether, you know, this was a true Deep Purple album. Some of them have been like, yeah, I don't really think it was a true Deep Purple album. I know Ian Gillan, who wasn't even in the band at the time, he even said that, you know, it's a good album, but he doesn't really think it was a real Deep Purple record. You know, Richie Blackmore, however, Richie Blackmore actually liked that record. You know, Richie Blackmore wasn't even in the band at the time, but he actually liked the album. He thought that he commended Tommy Bolin. He thought Tommy Bolin's performance on the record was really good. So again, you know, they kind of keeping somewhat of that same formula of Stormbringer. They still got the funk, soul elements on this record. That those elements are still pretty prominent on here. But the thing is, Tommy Bolin, he brings back that hard rock aspect. He brings it back. See, the thing about Stormbringer, even though that's my second favorite from the Mark III lineup, uh, honestly, they did tone down a bit on the hard rock on that record. But Tommy Bolin, him coming in the band, he brought that back. He really brought that back. It's a very rocking album, and his performance on this album is really good. I mean, a lot of his solos on here are just amazing. His solos on here are just amazing, man. Like, he really nailed it on here. And the riffs and so forth. Man, so many good tracks. I mean, the opening song, "Coming Home." Let's see here. Dealer is a good one. Let's see, what's another one? Love Child. Really like Love Child. Love Child is probably one of my favorites. This Time Around, slash Ode to G. Man, that song, the This Time Around part, is based around John Lord. John Lord was like kind of improvising in the studio on his keys, and Glenn Hughes went in and like begged him, like, yo, just give me 5 minutes with this. And he performed over what John Lord had been improvising with, and it turned out to be amazing. And then that instrumental "Ode to G" is such a phenomenal instrumental. I mean, Tommy Bolin's guitar on there is just amazing. I mean, the whole entire band does a wonderful job. Let's see what else. I think I mentioned Drifter. Lady Luck is a good one too. But I mean, overall, this is a good record. Overall, this is a good record. But like I said, a lot of people just didn't really feel that it was a true Deep Purple album, and also a lot of fans, they were a bit upset because Richie Blackmore wasn't in the band at this time. And there's even been a few members. I don't know if it was Ian Pace or John Lord. One of them even said that they feel like this album shouldn't have came out under the Deep Purple name. Somebody in the band said that. I don't know. Somebody who was in the band in this lineup said that they felt like the album shouldn't have came out under the Deep Purple name. But I recently watched what do you call it, the EPK, where the members were talking about this album, the ones that were in the band at the time, and they actually liked this album. They've actually kind of reevaluated it, and they think that they consider it to be one of the band's best records in the catalog. And I think a lot of music critics and I think a lot of fans have kind of reassessed this record, and they look at it more positively. But I like it. It's a real good record. So definitely check this one out, man. It's awesome. It's just unfortunate that Tommy Bolin ended up passing away not long after it. I think it was after the tour for that album. I think he passed away. But he was a great guitar player, and I think if he would have lived long enough, I think he would have been seen as a great guitar virtuoso, because he did an amazing job on here. And he actually had his own career going on before he joined Deep Purple. He was in a couple of other bands, and he was actually kind of getting his solo career going. He released I think he released a solo album when Come Taste the Band came out. He released his solo album around the same time, and then I think he released another solo album after the band's breakup, but unfortunately he passed away not long after that, man. So R.I.P. to Tommy Bolin. R.I.P. to John Lord as well. John Lord passed away in 2012, years later, man. And but yeah, anyway, Come Taste the Band, just a remarkable album. If you guys will just hold on a minute, I also got a bonus I want to show you. Just one more album that I want to briefly touch on as well. Okay, so this next album, I know y'all have heard me mention it a couple of times in this video, but this is Perfect Strangers right here. This is Perfect Strangers, released in 1984, and this was Deep Purple's comeback. It was the reunion of the Mark II lineup. So Roger Glover, Ian Gillan, as well as Richie Blackmore all came back together with Ian Pace and John Lord. Richie Blackmore, he had started his own heavy metal band called Rainbow, which I actually have 3 Rainbow albums. I have the first 3 albums with Ronnie James Dio on vocals. Roger Glover, I'm not sure what Roger Glover was doing. I know he produced that one Judas Priest album. I think it was Sin After Sin. It was either Sin After Sin or Stained Glass. I can't remember. Excuse me. For those of you who know which Judas Priest album Roger Glover produced, leave it in the comments. But I know it was either Sin After Sin or Stained Glass. But I think it was Sin After Sin. I know he produced that. I know he was producing records. I don't know what bands he was actually playing in. I think he might have been focusing on producing. Ian Gillan, he had started his own band called Gillan, and he also had a brief stint singing for Black Sabbath. He did the Born Again album released in 1983, which is a really good record. I think a very underrated Black Sabbath album. I don't have a physical copy of Born Again, but I'm planning on getting it. Because, Born Again is a real good record. That's the one that had, like, the demon-looking baby on the cover. But, yeah, that's a real good record. So, Ian Gillan, he did that, and as well as his own band. I think his band Gillan was, like, in the late 70s, early 80s. Let's see, Ian Pace and John Lord, they actually was in Whitesnake for a minute. They actually were in Whitesnake. When David Coverdale, when he formed the band Whitesnake, they did a few albums with him. I know they did. I think Reddy and Willing was the first one they did as members of Whitesnake, and I think they were in the band from that album, which was 1980. And I think the last album they did with Whitesnake might have been Saints and Sinners, or it was Slide It In. I'm not sure. I think they might have performed on Slide It In as well. That was in 84. I'm not sure, but I know they were definitely on Ready and Willing up until Saints and Sinners. I know that for sure. I know they played on the Saints and Sinners album. But yeah, back to Perfect Strangers. Yeah, this was the comeback album for Deep Purple, and it was a huge success. I mean, I read somewhere where the critics kind of didn't really like the album too much, but I think it's a good album. I think it's a really good record. Uh, and this lineup actually lasted for a long time. Real good songs on here, man. Knocking at Your Back Door, which was a huge hit, had a real cool video. Under the Gun, Mean Street, A Gypsy's Kiss, Wasted, Sunsets. A lot of great songs on here. A lot of great songs on this album. I think it's a real good record. I listen to it quite often. Not as much as I do the 70s albums, but yeah, I think I probably should spend a little bit more time with Perfect Strangers, man. But it's, from the few times I've listened to this album, I really enjoyed it. But it was a great comeback album, huge success for the band, and I think this Mark II lineup lasted for, I think, a couple of albums. I don't know, because there was a point where Ian Gillan ended up leaving the band because him and Richie Blackmore started to have issues again, and then he came back into the band sometime in the early '90s. Because they had that singer named Jolene Turner. He did that Slaves and Masters album, and I think then Ian Gillan came back. I think it was the Battle Rages On. He came back in one of those albums. So yeah, it was a little, yeah, that particular era of the band's a little kind of, it's kind of sketchy for me. I can't keep up with that, but I just know that this album was a big success. It was the comeback of Deep Purple, and it was the comeback of the Mark II lineup. That I can say at least lasted up until like the early 90s, possibly. I don't know if there was anybody that left the band in between that time, but still, Perfect Strangers, really great record. You know what I'm saying? And again, this was another album I used to see a lot at Walmart back in the day. I used to see this one too. It wasn't in the budget bin though. It would be amongst the other CDs in the CD racks. But yeah, another very popular Deep Purple record, Perfect Strangers, man. So check this one out too. Really great record. And that's it for this video, talking about Deep Purple. Hope you guys enjoyed it, man. This is something that's been long overdue. I really like Deep Purple. I'm not like a huge, like, diehard Deep Purple fan, but I really enjoy the band, and I listen to their music a lot. And I can see how they've had such a huge influence on hard rock and heavy metal. It's good to see the band still going on, although they have had lineup changes and stuff throughout the years. They've had members to leave and do their own thing. They've had members to pass away and so forth, but it's good to see the band still going on and still touring. I don't know how long they're going to keep touring, honestly. I know they've toured with Judas Priest in the past and so forth, but maybe one day, Lord willing, I'll get to catch a show or something like that and see that band play. But in any regards, hope you guys enjoyed this Deep Purple video. And if you're someone that's not familiar with Deep Purple, man, I hope this video and influences you to go check out their music and dig into their catalog. But as always, hope everybody has a blessed day, a blessed week. Thank you to everybody that's been subscribing to the channel. Thank you to everybody who's been showing their support. If you could do me a huge favor, just give me a thumbs up, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, tap that bell. And as always, hope everybody has a blessed day and a blessed week. Love, peace, and music. Peace out, y'all.